See, it's an example of why progressives suck. Like, they be obsessed with hating Morrissey because he said some not progressive things, but they're missing in plain sight how bad Johnny Rotten sucks ass. Morrissey should get a pass. I'm gonna explain why. The Smiths were a cultural revolution. They really added to music. They inspired so many bands. And not like we're one of many making the same music, like they literally invented and contributed to the culture. And the Smiths were never purely regressive. They were one of the most progressive bands regarding sexuality topics when it's forbidden to even mention that. He was singing songs like Hand in Glove. Come on now. Um, this is an example of what I mean why progressives are incompetent. Like they'll focus on somebody who's like 80% with them, but in 20% they're not. And they'll like focus on hating them and attacking that person. Meanwhile, someone who's way more odious in a similar category, like Johnny Rotten and the Sex Pistols, they leave them alone. It's insane. Like, first of all, punk music, this idea like being punk means you're progressive. Like, do you know where the origin of punks being progressive comes from? It's rather similar to like anti-zoo and pedo furries. In the sense, like you look at the furry community, there's a large segment of them who are zoos and pedos, which leads to like the large outspoken "we're not zoos and we're not pedos" portion. That's how punks became progressive. This music started in pretty much the UK in the 70s, and it was above all else about anger, rebellion, young male anger and aggression in the 70s British working class. And they had a huge problem with skinheads. Yeah, like they literally, that's where the skinheads got their start. The shaved head, the boots, and punk music. And they turned punk music into like Nazi anthems. That's why skinhead music is punk. They were punk fans who were Nazis. And because that happened first, the base template of punk was just anger, energy, and rebellion. But rebellion against what? It doesn't have to be against regressives. In the case of the skinheads, it was against uh, the working man getting shit on and regressive views, right? So much in the way in the furry community today, there's like some of the furries are like, I'm not a zoo and I'm not a pedo. I just do this for fandom. That's how punks became progressive. Or when you hear of a punk, you assume they're very progressive. That political lean of punks were because of the skins. You understand that, right? So the reason I'm mentioning this is punk, especially in the 70s when it started, was not intrinsic with being progressive. If anything, the first politicizing of punk were the skins, which led to the progressive backlash to the point punks were synonymous with being anti-fascist and very progressive and hating Nazis so much. The reason that happened is because the skinheads liked their music and tried to make it very right wing. So the punks who didn't like that became very left wing. Do you see how that works? So let's establish that the Sex Pistols were in punk in a time when that was going on. And they were by far not like we're really anti-fascist punks. They were just more like neutral, and they were super fucking regressive. Uh, I was just explaining how the song "Bodies" is about a poor girl in Birmingham. She had some kind of emotional problems. Teenager, she was forced in a psych ward where she was raped. She probably had a history of sexual abuse, and she had an abortion. And she wrote them letters saying she was a fan. They made this song calling her an animal and a dog and shit. And they also exploited this teenager because she'd come to their shows and they knew she was vulnerable, so they also sexually exploited her. And they made a song mocking that she's a disgraceful animal. Of course, they're trying to backtrack now, you know, even though he's still an open right wing shithead voting for Trump. I guess he has American citizenship, right? But they try to backtrack, like, no, mate, it's not what I meant. I know, I'm not meaning to call her name. I meant, like, it's just not a nice thing. It's like, was it a nice thing when you were raping the teenage girl with mental problems who looked to you as a help and you exploited her and then dehumanized her on your shit song? That's why one of the best covers I say is Veruca Salt's cover of it. because the way Nina Gordon sings the lyrics, it's almost like a protest against what he was doing. This is why Progs can't anything done. They'll focus on someone like Morrissey, who said some things that are not completely progressive. And like I think he made fun of like the mayor's accent and shit like that. But they'll let someone like Johnny Rotten pass without any fucking like this bitch is basically a skinhead, right? Like you're a sexist, abusive thug, and you just got in punk so early you didn't have to choose a side. You didn't have to be a skin or an anti-fascist punk. But it's very evident which side you lean closer to because to this fucking day, your old, skinny, fucking HIV looking ass is a fan of Trump, right? And no one clocks it. Just you know what I mean? Like, ban the Sex Pistols. They were a mistake. They got into punk before you had to be anti fascist to be against the regressive lean of punk. And it's very evident they're highly regressive to the point this piece of trash is a Trump fan today. Nah, they just get away with that because progressives always be like, the guy who was like breaking boundaries and the acceptance of gay rights by openly describing homosexual relationships and saying not to care about people's judgment. He's the enemy that needs to be banned because he said he made fun of the mayor's accent. Like, all right, I'm not saying Morrissey is Morrissey, okay? But this is what I'm trying to say. I don't see Morrissey as a Nazi. Let's put it like that. I see Morrissey as an old dude who's not totally progressive, but not regressive either. I see him as in the middle in his own person. But someone like Johnny Rotten, who's frankly a Nazi, and if he got into punk later, he probably would have been a skinhead. You just don't even care about. That's how progs work by purity testing. So that's how they shrink the movement. They'll like MAGAs don't do that. Conservative, this is something the CIA, M16, KGB, everybody has been training you to do. You'll look for somebody who's 80% supporting you and attack them until they don't want anything to do with you. Versus your frank enemy, who you will not care about. Progs view their job as to root out the impure among them, and that's why nobody's progressive, and that's why the poor are scared of them. You don't see MAGA doing that. Like, if you're a MAGA fan, but you're not a Catholic and you don't like the idea of Catholic supremacy, you're like, this guy needs to get out. He doesn't support a Catholic-fascist state. They're like, no, as long as you're supportive broadly of our goals, you can join. That's a winning strategy. But only progs will spend all their time talking about, like, Morrissey and, like, the more obvious, odious troll like Johnny Rotten, where if things were just a little different, he might have been a skinhead fan. And to this day, he's a fucking Republican piece of shit they don't care about.